What's happening, people? Welcome back to the show. Welcome back to the Upper Tier Podcast. It's absolutely roasting here today in Ireland. What a day it was yesterday as well. A little bit of advice as well. Look after your pets, folks. Look after your dogs. Don't be walking them in those midday hours where the sun's at its highest. Make sure they've plenty of fluids. You know, if you can get some of those frozen yogurt, ice cream yolks for them and stuff like that as well. Keep them nice and cool. You know, mix in a little bit of wet food with the dry food if you can, just to keep things a little bit moist and all, and you know, look after them. Don't leave them out in the sun too long, all that kind of stuff. I am a dog owner, we're dog minders as well, so it's really important that you do that. But we're going to talk this morning. It's an absolute transfer window madness, isn't it, at the moment? Here we go last night for Elliot Anderson to Man City. 130 million. 130 million. Now, there's no doubt this boy is a very talented midfielder. But 130 million for a midfielder who I agree was levels above Nottingham Forest, who he played for last season and all, and was probably a big part in the fact that Nottingham Forest stayed in the division. Because remember, they were in the middle of that kind of relegation battle there with about, 5-6 weeks to go or whatever it was and all. But like 130 million. And the problem for this is, it's not necessarily the transfer to Man City. It's not necessarily Man City fixing up some of their midfield issues or whatever it is. We know that Bernardo Silva's leaving. We know they really have never priced Gundogan. Kevin De Bruyne is gone. There's been a lot of change in that midfield. But the issue is the ripple and the knock-on effect for other teams in the transfer windows, because now what happens there is, once that deal goes through and it's confirmed and the boy is holding up the shirt and all the usual stuff, what happens is there's a ripple effect through the transfer market where everyone's fee levels up, and that becomes a real problem then, because then every player that you're looking to put into your starting 11, if you need starters, is going to be 85 to 100 million. And any player that you're trying to sign as a squad player then becomes 50, 60 million. And this is what we're seeing now. We're seeing the first kind of protocol. We've seen Spurs do a little bit of business and stuff like that, got in a couple of good players and stuff like that. But what we're seeing now is, we're seeing the likes of Tonali at 90 to 100 million. We're seeing Mateus Fernandes, who was pitched originally at about 50, 60 million. You got to think about this boy as well. This boy's been relegated twice. And they're pitching him at he's now in the 80, 85 million now, which I think Man United, when they were chasing him, were looking at somewhere around 50, or they might get the deal done at 55. That's now 30 million more now. And part of that is the ripple effect through the transfer market. Teams begin to believe that they get a lot more money, that teams are under pressure to level up and sign players. And the transfer market's an absolute madness. We see Gordon going to Barcelona for 70 million or whatever it was. Absolutely insane. We're looking at signing the boy Yan Diomande for I think it's 100 to 120 million, which is absolutely insane. And it's going to get to, when does the transfer market get then to the breaking point? Look, it's all well and good. It's all well and good Nottingham Forest getting their 130 million for Elliot Anderson. But then what happens when Nottingham Forest want to sign players? And all of a sudden, all these Premier Leagues, and we know most of them are fairly cash rich at this stage, because there's huge money in the broadcasting rights, there's huge money in the sponsorship and everything else and all that kind of thing. So we know there's plenty of money there. But the issue is, a lot of these clubs, certainly, I won't say in the bottom 10, because there's been a flexing in the league at this stage where that kind of thing has changed at this stage. But the modus normally for these clubs is they'll go and sell a Crown Jewel, a Morgan Gibbs White, an Elliot Anderson, a Murillo, whoever it is, and they get like 100 million or whatever it is, 80 to 100 million, 120 million, 130 million, whatever it is. But then they go and they try and replace that player with a little nugget through their scouting group that might be 20, 30 million, 15 million, whatever it is. And then they go again. And we've seen with Brighton. Brighton's probably the best example of it, because they've done an unbelievable job at doing this. I mean, I'd say Brighton probably is, between transfers and between value and between scouting, Brighton are probably up there as probably one of the best clubs at doing this in the league, with what the business that they've done and the players that they've sold and everything else. And I think people are kind of copping onto it, and you could see it last summer with the nonsense about Believe It. Bigger clubs now are starting to cop onto this. You have United there going, you know, I'd imagine the conversations are, well, if I'm going to pay 80 million or 85 million for Mateus Fernandes, I may as well throw another 5 million on it and go for Tonali, you know. And then the emergence of Spurs in this window as well has been a little bit strange, because Spurs are starting to act like a top 5 club, like a top 6 club. The moves that they're making this summer, the players that they're linked with, the deals they're trying to get over the line, is, I'm sure Spurs fans feel like how we felt as Liverpool fans last summer, going, where's all this money coming from? Why are we signing these players? You know, it just for us just felt a little bit weird, because it's not how our clubs move. Spurs normally end up targeting a player, but they end up then getting their second or their third choice at it. You know, they normally work in that 40, 50, 60 million range. So now they're levelling up, as you can see, and well needed, because for 2 years they've been down in that relegation area, so they need to do something. But it's just weird. I'd love to get your thoughts on the transfer window and how you think it's faring out, and what way are clubs going to be able to do business, you know what I mean? Because obviously, not only have you got the transfer fee, but you've obviously got the wages and the packages that people want. And at a time where clubs, you know, we've seen it with United, have to go through a huge cost-cutting exercise and all to rein money in and cut down on jobs so it makes sensible within their financial structure and all. And at a time where a lot of clubs are probably looking at these things because they're quite sensitive to it as well. One of the key things they're trying to do is keep within a certain wage structure. But the problem with keeping in that wage structure is, do you then take yourself out of the race for, you know, these top 10, top 12, top 15 players perceived in the transfer window? And how do you adjust to that then? You know, and the difficulty as well is, like, if, you know, our players now that have multiple interests, like we know with Yandy and Mande, we know the PSG are interested, we know there's other clubs that are interested, we know Bayern will be interested. So, are they going to start setting clubs off other clubs just to raise the value, just to squeeze that other 5 or 10 million, just to squeeze that other 50, 60k a week, all these kind of things, just to squeeze maybe a better percentage on image rights or whatever it is? And that's the difficulty now for these Premier League clubs, because for them it's like, although there's money there is that hampering from PSR and FFP and the ruling within Europe as well, the UEFA ruling, and how you have to keep your finances and all that kind of thing. So you can't just keep on going out and signing 80 to 120 million pound players, 200, 300, 400 grand a week, and just keep on doing that, because that's the way the market is headed. So the question is really, should the Premier League or the FA or a governing body, there was talk that they might bring in a kind of governing body to oversee this maybe, and kind of put a little bit of structure around this and take a little bit of the ridiculousness out of it. We know the market will always drive the situation, but I would fear for football a little bit, and especially in the Premier League, because it's so cash rich. So when Premier League clubs come in for players, either on the continent or within the league, you just get this levelling up of the value, of the cost, of the package, and what else can be offered and all this kind of thing. And I think at some stage you're going to hit a bubble where we're trying to condense the league in a way that, like, we've seen it already, where it's doing the right thing, where there's a lot more competition in the league, you know, where there isn't that kind of like 10 teams that are competing and the other 10 teams are just taking part. There's a lot of teams now that are, you know, really competitive week on week. There's a lot of teams now vying for those European positions. There's a lot of teams vying now for the domestic cups in a much more stronger way, because they've had the money, because they're able to bring in better coaching, because they're able to provide better facilities, because they're able to bring in a better quality of player. But if the market keeps on going the way it's going, and the heavy reliance on the scouting system, and even within the scouting system now, you're seeing even young players that are being scouted now. You know, the days of picking up those players now for 2, 3, 4, 5 million, like what Brighton used to do from South America or wherever it is, even those days are getting caught out now. And you're saying that a lot of those players now, it's like, 10, 15, 20 million now, but I think the league really has to have a look at this and find a way or a structure to address this. I'm not necessarily stating for, bringing in a kind of a draft kind of, not a draft kind of situation, but some sort of, there has to be a little bit of flexibility to be able to do deals and attract players and all that kind of stuff. But there has to be a point. Are we going to hit a point of diminishing return where you just, these other teams, the teams that are down there, I don't know, the Fulhams, I won't say the Bournemouths or the Brentfords because they done really, really well this season, but the Palaces down there, I don't know who's come up, Ipswich, these type of teams when they come up and stuff like that, are they just going to be chalked out of the market totally? Even though the riches and the spoils are there from reaching the Premier League and the broadcasting rights and all that kind of stuff, you can't just keep on doing this. And especially in a window like the current window, where teams are trying to level up, especially in that top 4, top 5, top 6 area. You've got Chelsea trying to break back in there. They're going to have a season out now. They'll want to bounce back financially. They have to. You'll want Spurs will want to, level back up again, get into the competitive nature of that top 6 again. But so many teams even in there, the likes of Liverpool probably need 3-4 players. City needs some players. Arsenal are looking to tweak their front line maybe with 2 or 3 players, but it'll have to be of a certain quality, because if you're looking for starters, then you're in the 80 million game. Like you're not going to put a left winger out there on that Arsenal team, take out Martinelli or Trossard or whatever it is. Who are you looking to sign? You're going to have to look at signing the likes of a Barcola or someone of that level with big money. You're talking money somewhere in the region of 80 million minimum, and then whatever the wage structure and everything else is. But can teams really afford to keep on going out summer after summer, having to spend $500 million? And what's the breaking point then? When does it become like an impossible situation to be getting in these players? You know what I mean? Because you can see even with the bigger clubs from a scouting point of view are generally scouting somewhat ready-made players that go into their teams and have a certain amount of proven track record ability, all that kind of stuff. There's only a sprinkling of talent that goes in there really, that's planning for the future and the youth and stuff like that. And then of that, what's the hit rate like on that? You know what I mean? How many of them actually make their way to the first team? How many of them end up going, they look decent, and the next thing they're snapped up by other teams? So, you might snap a player up for 5-6 million to put him into your youth academy, and then you sell him on for 18 or 20 million, and you take the quick 10 million profit or whatever it is, So, how many of those players actually end up in your starting 11 or in your Premier League squad? It's a low percentage, I think, a real low percentage. I know Chelsea probably, have better success than anyone in terms of developing their loan book and, selling players on and all that kind of stuff. But we've seen it even with Chelsea. I think some of the latest figures that come out, they might do 400 million quid worth of sales, but they might only make 30 million in profit. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a weird one. You can't just, do that level of sales and that level of players and turn over that, and then you just make 20-30 million, because the juice out of that just doesn't justify the squeeze, and especially when you're operating in that kind of project where it's really hampering your first team to the point where key players want to go, or your success is being diminished, or you're kind of, you're 1 foot in the water, 1 foot out, so you're competing, but you're not really competing, and you're hoping that, some of these younger players might hit their straps and stuff. But in the meantime, you have players like, just Chelsea as an example, you have the likes of Ender Fernandez, Caicedo, Cucurella, who's now gone. You know what I mean? You might have a Cole Palmer or Neto. They're looking at their careers going, I'm pissing my career away here, and these guys want to just money ball up kids all the time. So then you get players that are just fucked off and pissed off. Yes, they've brought in Alonso. We know that Alonso had a conversation with Cucurella. Conversation obviously went so well that straight away he's off to Real Madrid. So it's going to be, there's a real challenge in this transfer window, and it affects teams on so many levels. But it's the trickling down. If you like, let's suppose Elliot Anderson is going to be the top of the umbrella. He's going to be de-signing this summer. Everything then trickles down out of that, and that has a knock-on effect. And, you know, for some of the teams can shoulder it. So, like, Arsenal could shoulder it, Liverpool could shoulder it, United could shoulder it. You know, the bigger clubs can shoulder it, you know. But where it comes a problem is where we want the league to become really, really competitive, that every week we get really, really good games, and that most teams, if they go out and perform, can have a chance within these matches. We may end up regressing back to where we were. Like, we all want the Bournemouths and the Brentfords and, you know, these teams to do really, really well. That's what we want to see. We don't want to see a league where, you know, 5 games a year or 10 games a year home and away, that your competitive games are really your top 5 games or your top 8 games or whatever it is, and that all the other games you're just going out and smashing teams away, you know. And I think that's the real concern. The real concern, you look at Palace, they sold Gahey, you know, we've seen how they fell down a little bit then when Gahey left, you know. If they sell the Crow, you know, we know that Glasner's gone. If they sell the Crow, if they sell Wharton, you know, if they sell Mateta, where do they go? Where's Crystal Palace going to go? The only place that's going to go is potentially into the Championship. You know, because the chances of them being able to replace those players with that type of quality is fairly slim. We know Brighton have done it for a number of seasons, but we've even seen Brighton stumble a little bit in recent times and had a bit of a fall off because of their policy of what they do. Their scouting, you know, hasn't been where it was. It's taken a bit of a dip. Still good, but taking a bit of a dip. Hence you see the indifference of Brighton this season and the way they played. You know, how many times did myself and Darren do a podcast where we said, you know, we generally nail on Brighton that Brighton would win, but the problem we have is we don't know which Brighton's going to show up. That was the problem. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. This transfer window, it's an absolute madness at the moment. Elliot Anderson obviously is going to be the trigger point for this now, 130 million. But now what does that mean? What does it mean for Tonali, Yandi Amande, Mateus Fernandes, Julian Alvarez, apparently trying to get locked down into a deal with Victor Gyökeres, going out of Arsenal, plus money going to Atletico Madrid. Absolutely madness. The boy is only there a year. Let me know how this is all going to flesh out, and what does it mean, and how do you feel about the level of money and everything that's going into the game at the moment in the Premier League. Are we on a pathway kind of destruction a little bit? Let me know your thoughts. Until next time, folks, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification button, drop a like on the video. Talk to you again real soon. Enjoy your weekend.